A powerful black CEO asked a simple question on a flight. Why was I skipped? What followed exposed more than bias. It exposed how quiet moments can speak volumes. Maurice Lattimore had been up since 4:15 a.m., his phone buzzing before the sun even considered rising. He was used to mornings like this. In fact, he preferred them. Early flights meant fewer interruptions and more time to think. And today wasn't just another day at the office. It was a high-stakes meeting in Boston that could reshape the next phase of expansion for his logistics company. By 6:10 a.m., he was seated in first class aboard Flight 2237, waiting to taxi out of General Mitchell International Airport in Milwaukee. His seat was 3A, a window spot with a clean view of the runway, and no one beside him, something he appreciated. Morris, 48, wore a navy suit with a white shirt, no tie, collar open. His tablet rested on the tray in front of him, displaying notes and performance reports. He scrolled slowly, eyes focused, but relaxed. The plane wasn't full. Business travelers mostly, some in suits, some in joggers and headphones. The air held that distinct mix of reheated coffee and recycled cabin breeze. Morris didn't care. He was locked in, already preparing responses to the board's likely objections. "Good morning, sir," a voice said briefly. A flight attendant, blonde, early 40s, ponytail pulled tight, barely made eye contact as she passed by. No offer of water, no warm greeting, just a glance and gone. He didn't react. No need to read too much into it. Not yet. Across the aisle, a woman in her 70s glanced up from her crossword puzzle. Her name was Helen McKinley. No one on that flight knew she had once served as a federal judge in St. Paul for over 2 decades. She looked like someone's grandmother, hair pulled back in a loose bun, dressed in a brown cardigan and loafers. She noticed the greeting Morris received. Or rather, the one he didn't. Helen didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered on the way the attendant skipped Maurice and beamed at the man in 3C moments later. She'd seen enough in her lifetime to recognize quiet patterns. And sometimes those patterns were louder than words. Morris kept reviewing his notes. Every so often he'd shift slightly in his seat or glance around. Still no drink, no hello, just the low murmur of the cabin and the occasional click of a seatbelt. 25 minutes later, the plane lifted into the sky. It was a smooth takeoff. Passengers settled in, pulling down window shades or adjusting neck pillows. Morris closed his tablet and leaned back slightly. For a moment he thought about home. His daughter's art show was next week. She'd begged him to come this time. He'd already told his assistant to cancel everything that day. He wasn't missing it again. A different flight attendant walked by, a younger man this time, and handed menus to the passengers in rows 1 through 3. He skipped Morris. Flat out skipped him. Helen raised her eyebrows slightly but stayed quiet. The man paused beside the woman in 2A. "Would you like the mushroom omelette or the croissant with smoked salmon?" he asked her, grinning. Morris waited. Nothing. He cleared his throat gently. The flight attendant didn't look back. Eventually, a third attendant came by to offer warm towels. This one stopped short at Morris's seat before abruptly moving to the next row. Morris watched, then slowly turned to look out the window. His expression didn't change. His body didn't shift. But inside, something settled. Not shock, just recognition. Helen watched all of it. Her eyes tracked each exchange, each moment skipped. She slowly reached for her phone and lowered it discreetly into her lap, camera facing upward. But something was about to happen that would shift the weight of this quiet flight onto an entire nation's conscience. By the time the cabin lights dimmed for the breakfast service, Morris already knew how the rest of the flight would go. He'd seen it before. Not this exact situation, but the rhythm of being quietly brushed aside in spaces where people didn't expect to see someone like him. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't confrontational. He had too much to lose for that. But he also wasn't naive. He kept his face neutral as the trays began to roll out. The familiar click of plastic latches and metal carts echoed down the aisle. Aromas of reheated eggs, buttered croissants, and hot coffee filled the cabin. People perked up. Laptops went away. Conversations quieted. Maurice glanced across the aisle. Helen had tucked her phone out of view and now watched the crew like she was reading a case file. Calm, focused, nothing obvious, just taking mental notes. The lead attendant, the same woman from earlier, began distributing the meals. Row 1, both sides. Then 2A and 2C. She smiled, made small talk. She placed the tray in 2C's lap with a, "Here you go, sir," and a wink that felt practiced. Then she reached Maurice's row. She skipped him without breaking stride. "Smoked salmon or the omelette?" she asked the man in 3C. Maurice sat up slightly, politely. "I didn't get a menu," he said, his voice steady. The attendant glanced at him quickly. "Oh, we're actually out of meals." Her tone was flat. No apology, no explanation. She turned her head to 3C again. "But he's getting his," Maurice said, glancing at the tray being unwrapped just 2 feet away. She didn't answer, just moved on, pushing the cart forward. Maurice leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the window. The sky outside was smooth and cloudless. Inside, the silence was much louder now. 3C, a man in his early 30s, wearing Beats headphones, looked over awkwardly. "You want mine, man? I don't even eat eggs." Maurice shook his head once, gently. "Thanks, but don't worry about it." The cabin grew quiet again. Helen's phone was angled down toward her coat pocket, camera rolling. Her hand never moved. She looked out the window like she wasn't watching anything, but her ears caught everything. About 10 minutes passed. Then another attendant, tall, younger, with a shaved head, walked through checking trays. He stopped when he saw Maurice without one. "Did you not get a meal, sir?" he asked, genuinely confused. Maurice looked up at him. "I was told you were out." The young man blinked. "Let me check." He turned and walked briskly toward the galley. A few moments later, he returned with a sealed omelette tray. "We had 3 extra," he said, placing it down gently. "I'm really sorry about that. Not sure what happened." Maurice gave a polite nod. "Appreciate it." But he didn't touch the tray. It just sat there. Cooling. Helen leaned forward slightly and spoke for the first time. "May I ask something?" she said quietly. Maurice turned to her. "Would this have gone the same way if you looked different?" Maurice exhaled slowly through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "I ask myself that more times than I can count," he replied. Neither of them said anything else for the next half hour, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of calculation, of knowing exactly how thin the line is between being served and being ignored, and how often that line moves depending on who's watching. A few rows back, someone scrolled past a tweet about breakfast. Another passenger chuckled at a podcast. In 3A, a man in a navy suit sat perfectly still beside a full meal he never asked for and wouldn't eat. But the real story hadn't even started yet, and what was quietly captured on Helen's phone was about to make a lot of people very, very uncomfortable. By the time the captain announced their descent into Boston, Logan, the flight attendants had returned to autopilot, smiling, offering water refills, collecting trays. No one mentioned what had happened in row 3. Maurice hadn't touched the omelette. He had spent the rest of the flight rereading the quarterly review on his tablet, not because he was focused, but because it gave him something to look at that wasn't a wall of forced politeness and invisible lines. Helen McKinley had stopped pretending to do her crossword. Instead, she'd watched, quietly, carefully. Her phone rested face down on her lap now, but she'd gotten what she needed. 3 minutes and 17 seconds. That's how long the recording was. Enough to show the moment Maurice asked why he was skipped. Enough to catch the way the lead flight attendant's tone turned sharp when answering him. Enough to highlight the expression on Maurice's face. Composed, but heavy. She didn't know if she was going to use it. She hadn't decided, but she knew one thing. If she didn't capture it, no one would believe it had happened at all. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers began stirring, stretching, checking phones, adjusting coats. The energy shifted. People moved on. Morris stayed seated, eyes forward, waiting for the doors to open. His posture was straight, hands folded. He didn't look angry. Just done. The first-class cabin emptied fast. Business travelers were in a rush. Meetings to get to, calls to return. Morris stood, took his briefcase from the overhead bin, and gave a quick nod to Helen. "Have a good day," he said. "You too," she replied. Then added, "Don't let this slide." Morris paused, looked at her. "I won't," he said. Outside the gate, he moved with purpose but without hurry. The terminal was buzzing with morning movement, gate changes, announcements, luggage wheels dragging across tile. He found a quiet spot near a phone charging station and opened his laptop. 15 minutes later, he filed a formal complaint through the airline's digital portal. It was methodical, not angry, just a clear summary of events. He didn't exaggerate, didn't speculate. He listed the flight number, the time, the names he remembered from the crew's badges, and a direct quote from the attendant who'd told him, "We're out." He clicked submit, and that could have been the end of it. But Helen had other plans. She sat on a bench in the terminal, sipping from a travel mug, debating her next move. She hadn't touched social media in weeks, but something about the moment, it sat heavy on her. She pulled out her phone, trimmed the video, and typed. "I never post things like this, but what I witnessed on Flight 2237 this morning left a knot in my chest. A black man in first class was flat out skipped during meal service. When he asked, he was told meals were out, while the man next to him was eating. I filmed it. Watch for yourself." She posted the video. By the time her Uber reached her daughter's house in Cambridge, the clip had been shared nearly 1,000 times. 3 hours later, it hit 20,000. And just before noon, someone from a major news outlet picked it up. They didn't even call her first, just ran the story with a blurred still of Morris's face, and the headline, "Airline staff allegedly deny first-class meal to black CEO." That word, allegedly, sat wrong with her. She had the proof. She'd lived it. Morris, meanwhile, was already in the conference room at the Seaport District, presenting to executives who had no idea his morning began with a quiet act of disrespect. He kept his tone measured, his slides tight. He didn't bring up the flight. Not yet. But when his assistant leaned over and whispered, "You're going viral on Twitter," he blinked. Once. No reaction. Later in the restroom, he watched the clip with the volume off. His jaw didn't move, but his eyes told a different story. But silence only works until the world hears something it can't ignore. And the world was now watching. By 2:45 p.m., the story had already spread beyond Twitter. Local news stations in Boston ran it as a midday segment. "Business traveler claims racial bias on flight," the anchor said, voice smooth, almost indifferent. The clip played in the corner of the screen. They kept Morris's name out of it, probably because he hadn't said a word yet. But anyone who recognized him from the logistics world knew exactly who he was. Within the hour, his name was trending. Helen sat in her daughter's kitchen, phone lighting up every few seconds. A friend from her law school days texted, "Is this real?" Another wrote, "Why did you post this?" The one that stuck with her most simply said, "Thank you." She didn't answer any of them. She just sat with it. Her daughter, Natalie, peeked in. "Mom, is this going to become a thing?" Helen didn't look up. "It already is." Meanwhile, on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in Boston's financial district, Morris sat through the rest of the board meeting like nothing had happened. He answered questions, challenged projections, smiled when necessary. But every time he checked his phone, there were more notifications. Some of the tweets were supportive. "The calm in his face is louder than any outburst. Grace under pressure. It's the silence that speaks volumes. This is why representation matters." Others weren't so kind. "There's always a camera when someone wants to play victim. Maybe it was just a mistake. Not everything is about race." Morris scrolled, expression flat. He wasn't surprised. Not at the comments, not at the speed, not even at the people now tagging the airline, demanding answers. Back at corporate headquarters in Dallas, the airline's communications team was already scrambling. The head of PR, Melissa Granger, stood at the center of a crowded conference room, holding her phone in one hand and a notepad in the other. "We need a holding statement within the hour," she said. "Do we confirm the crew's been identified?" someone asked. "We're still verifying names." "Should we contact the passenger?" Melissa shook her head. "Not until we know what our legal team says. For now, we acknowledge the incident and commit to a review." That's it. And so at 3:12 p.m., the airline posted a short, tight message to all their platforms. "We are aware of a video circulating involving a recent flight and are actively investigating the situation. We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind and are committed to treating every passenger with dignity and respect." It wasn't enough. Comments poured in by the second. "You don't tolerate it? Looks like you did exactly that. This isn't just about a bad crew. This is about who gets believed and who gets ignored. Where's the apology?" By 5 p.m, 3 former employees of the airline had posted anonymously on Reddit, claiming they had experienced or witnessed similar behavior on other flights. One of them wrote, "First-class crew is often quietly trained to manage the section's tone." Translation: favor the regulars, ignore the rest. The story wasn't just Morris's anymore, it was everyone's. Reporters called the company's media line non-stop. Producers at major networks reached out to Helen through her LinkedIn inbox. One offered to fly her to New York the next morning. She declined. She wasn't looking for attention. She just wanted people to understand that what she'd witnessed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. A microaggression, caught on video, magnified for the world to see. At 6:47 p.m., a woman who had been seated 2 rows behind Maurice posted a reply to the video. "I was on that flight. I saw what happened. I didn't speak up, and I should have. Watching this now makes me sick." That's when things shifted. The pile-on stopped feeling like outrage and started sounding like a reckoning. Because now it wasn't just Maurice. Now it was someone else saying, "Yes, that happened. And I let it. But silence can only shield people for so long, until enough voices break through and force the truth into the light." It wasn't until the following morning that Maurice received the official email from the airline. The subject line read, "Regarding your complaint, Flight 237. He opened it without much thought. The message was short, carefully worded, apologetic in tone, but clinical in structure. "We appreciate you bringing the incident to our attention. After reviewing available materials and speaking with involved parties, we have taken appropriate internal action. The crew members responsible have been removed from active duty, effective immediately. No names, no direct apology, no real admission. But the message was clear enough." He closed the email and pushed his laptop aside. Outside the hotel window, the Boston skyline was beginning to shimmer under a pale morning sun. He had another day of meetings ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of being seen, on a massive, public scale. Not because of what he said, but because of what someone else had witnessed. He didn't know Helen's last name until a producer from a cable news show called his assistant asking for comment. That's how he learned it. McKinley, retired federal judge. She'd gone on the record that morning. Spoke plainly. No grand statements. Just truth. "I didn't know who he was," she'd said on air. "Didn't matter. I knew what I saw." The clip of her interview racked up millions of views in just a few hours. The contrast between her quiet dignity and the airline's cautious response was hard to miss. By noon, the airline issued a new statement. "Following a full internal review, the airline has made the decision to terminate the employment of all staff involved in the incident on Flight 2237. We deeply regret the experience one of our passengers endured and have reached out directly to express our apology." The tone had shifted. Less corporate, more urgent. Still no names, but this time the consequence was clear. Entire crew gone. News headlines followed fast. "Entire flight crew Fired after bias incident. Passenger speaks out without saying a word. When dignity goes viral. Morris received dozens of calls that day. From colleagues, partners, even a few board members who admitted, sheepishly, they had seen the video before they knew he was the man in it. "You handled it with grace," one of them said. Maurice just nodded. He didn't feel graceful. He felt exhausted. He hadn't done anything special. He hadn't marched, shouted, or even responded publicly. He'd just sat there and stayed still. And somehow, the whole country was having a conversation about it. At 4:15 p.m., his assistant forwarded him a media request. "Good Morning America would like to have you on for a sit-down." He didn't respond. Instead, he called his daughter. "Did you see the video?" he asked. There was a pause. Then her voice. "Yeah, I saw it yesterday. Everyone did. You okay?" "I'm fine," she said. "Are you?" Morris didn't answer right away. He looked out the hotel window, phone pressed to his ear, watching a man in a reflective vest walk between luggage carts. "I'm used to it," he said. "But that doesn't mean it's okay," she replied. He smiled softly. She was right. Across the country, opinion pieces flooded the internet. Some praised the airline for acting swiftly. Others criticized them for not addressing the deeper issue. One columnist wrote, "It's not about firing a crew. It's about why people felt comfortable enough to behave that way in the first place." That line stuck with Morris, because that's exactly what he'd been thinking. But knowing you're right doesn't always mean you're ready to speak. And Morris still hadn't spoken a word to the public, not yet. 2 days later, Morris stood behind a podium in a conference center in downtown Cincinnati. It was an annual summit for supply chain executives, a place where words like efficiency, resilience, and logistical innovation got tossed around like currency. He hadn't planned to address the incident. In fact, his keynote was supposed to be about international freight strategy. But the air in the room had shifted. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen the clip. Even those who hadn't shared it still watched it. And now, everyone was waiting to hear what he had to say. Not about trucks or shipping routes, but about that 3-minute moment in row 3. He adjusted the mic. "I'm going to take a detour from my prepared remarks," he said. "We'll get to freight strategy in a bit." A few people chuckled. Most sat still. "I've been asked to speak about what happened on that flight, not because I said anything about it, but because people saw it. And I guess now they want to know how I feel." He paused. "Well, I wasn't surprised, that's the truth. I wish I could say I was. But anyone who's had to keep proving they belong in a room they already earned their way into knows exactly what I'm talking about." The silence in the ballroom stretched. No one checked their phone. "I didn't raise my voice. Didn't demand anything. I didn't record anyone. I didn't make a scene. I asked a question. I got an answer. That's all." He leaned slightly forward. "But here's what matters. Someone else saw it. Someone who didn't have to say anything." And they did. A few heads turned toward Helen, who sat in the 4th row, invited by the organizers at the last minute. Maurice continued. "You want to know why that video hit a nerve? Because people saw someone being treated like they didn't matter, and they recognized it. Maybe they'd been there. Maybe they'd looked away before. Maybe they saw a reflection of something they'd rather not admit." His voice was calm, measured. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't trying to make a point. He was telling the truth, and that was enough. It was never about a meal. Let's stop pretending it was. It was about how quickly people decide who's worth respect, who deserves attention, who gets the benefit of the doubt. A man in the back shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the aisle dabbed her eyes. Morris glanced down for a second, then looked up again. "I've been in rooms like this for decades, and I've learned that the hardest part isn't earning your place. It's staying silent when people pretend you haven't. We're taught to smile, nod, keep things moving. Don't rock the boat. Don't make people uncomfortable." He took a slow breath. But what if being comfortable is part of the problem? The room stayed still. Not frozen. Just listening. "Look, I'm not here to cancel anyone. I don't want revenge. I want people to pay attention. Not to the video, but to the moment. Because that moment happens every single day, in boardrooms, lobbies, waiting rooms, classrooms, airports. And most of the time, no one's filming. He stepped back from the mic just slightly. So no, I didn't go viral. The truth did. And maybe that's what we need more of. There was no applause right away, just silence. Then one person clapped. Another. Soon the room filled with the sound, not loud or explosive, but steady, thoughtful, real. Helen didn't clap. She just watched him the whole time, hands folded in her lap. She didn't need to applaud. She already knew. Morris gave a small nod of thanks and stepped down from the stage. But while the room sat with his words, another story had already begun. One not about airlines or outrage, but about two people quietly linked by a moment neither of them asked for. 3 weeks later, the internet had moved on. New headlines, new controversies, new clips gone viral. That's how things worked. People shared, reacted, debated, then scrolled to the next thing. But not everyone forgot. Morris was back at his office in downtown Minneapolis, catching up on operations after 2 weeks on the road. His assistant buzzed in. "There's a visitor here to see you. Says her name is Helen McKinley." He looked up from his laptop, surprised. "Send her in." Helen stepped in wearing a deep grey wool coat, the kind you hold onto for years because it fits just right and works with everything. She carried no bag, no phone in hand, just a quiet presence. "You didn't have to come all this way," Morris said, standing to shake her hand. "I was visiting my granddaughter in St. Paul," she replied with a smile. "Figured I owed you a face-to-face. You don't owe me anything." She took the seat across from him. "No, maybe not, but I wanted to see where you worked. Meet the man behind the silence." Morris sat back, exhaling through his nose. "Well," he said, "this is it. Paperwork, coffee that's never hot enough, and a never-ending stream of meetings." Helen smiled. They sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just comfortable. "Do you regret posting the video?" he asked eventually. She shook her head. "Not for a second." He nodded. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you regret staying quiet?" Morris didn't answer immediately. "I think silence has its own language," he said. "People assume if you don't react, you're unaffected. But silence can be louder than shouting, especially when people are paying attention." Helen looked down at her hands. "My husband would have liked you," she said softly. "He used to say dignity's the last thing they can't take unless you give it away." Morris smiled at that. "That's how I was raised, too." They spoke a little longer. Nothing heavy. She asked about his daughter's art show. He asked about her time on the bench. They shared stories, laughed at the absurdity of public opinion, and at how neither of them had planned for any of this. As she stood to leave, Helen paused by the door. "I didn't record that video because I thought it would make a difference," she said. "I recorded it because I didn't want to pretend I hadn't seen it." "That made all the difference," Maurice replied. She gave him a small smile and left. That evening, he stayed late in his office. Outside, the winter sun dipped low behind the buildings, casting long shadows over the city. He stared at the blank screen of his tablet, then opened a new note. At the top he typed, "Every day we're given a choice. Look away or pay attention. Speak or stay silent. And sometimes the loudest truth is the one no one wanted to catch on camera." He paused, then added, "Respect is not a favor. It's a starting point." He saved the file, closed the app, and sat back in his chair. He hadn't planned for any of this, but maybe that's the point. Sometimes it's the stories we never choose that end up changing us the most. Not because of how loudly they're told, but because of how clearly they're seen. If this story moved you, share it. Not for the clicks, not for the outrage, but to remind someone, anyone, that quiet moments matter. That how we treat each other when no one's watching is the real test, and that every person, no matter where they're seated, deserves to be seen. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human.